Hello, hello.
How you doing?
The thing I wanted to talk to you about today is I believe that housing is a human right.
Aha, that's one of my later hot takes. Now, did you read that carefully?
Uh, you don't have the. I think as a human, you have the right to a home, even
Hold
if you're
on.
living alone.
Hold on. Read what that says very carefully because that does not imply home.
House.
Yeah,
I
so the
think
take is
even
you do not have a human right to a house or living alone.
I thought those were synonyms. What do you define as a house that's not a home?
Well, so when I hear home, I'm thinking any shelter, right? But a house, well, that's going to be your general middle income white picket fence. But who's to say that
Mm,
you don't deserve an apartment or a townhome or something that wouldn't be a house by technicality?
okay, that okay. I don't really disagree with you on that one. Let me see. I think we could go on other things then, because I actually agree with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it for a second, the reality is that I don't think it's normal to like expect living on your own, right? Especially if you're first starting out. If you like lack experience in the world and you just got like an entry level job, you're going through college or whatever, why should you be able to afford a $300,000 house? It doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense.
I mean, I'm also a huge urbanist, so I also disagree with for that reason.
Oh,
Um,
that yeah. I mean, that's another thing is that the current way that our housing developments are is that those types of houses are just well, they're unsustainable from a city level, and I mean, let's face it, they're a luxury.
yeah. All right. So let's go into something else. And you don't have this on as a hot take, but I can imagine from your other ones that you would disagree with this. I
Okay,
am a firm believer in workplace democracy. Uh,
okay. I'm not inherently against worker democracy. I've seen instances where it's quite successful. For example, that is in fact the case for mining corporations, but that is not what I observe in every single case.
hmm. Yeah, because I think with the workplace democracy, I think the workers should have a say in their company. And I think currently they don't have enough of a say.
Is that the? Do you think that that would need to happen, or do you think that you'd be more in favor of, say, a union?
I'd be more in favor, honestly, I am more in favor of farther down the line, obviously. This you can just implement this today. But making it eventually mandated.
Okay, yeah, I completely disagree with that.
Once you get to like a certain point, so like say
I
we
I don't.
can't discuss
Go
trade.
ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, like I obviously like if you're a small business just starting out, then probably not. But I believe that once you get like to a certain limit of like you have this many workers, then you have to begin implementing workplace democracy into your system.
Okay. The problem that I'm having is that, and I find quite often what people do is that they argue this under the basis of a desire of socialism, right? They see like the problems of the capitalist system, and then they go, "Well, the best method is for us to go for a worker democracy." Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Even though that the outcomes don't necessarily output to a better extent, like a better result.
Why do you say that it doesn't necessarily go to a better result?
Because there are corporations that don't do too well when it comes to worker democracy
I mean,
or
I just want to understand.
worker ownership of the or it could be just like a worker co-op. One good example of this is banks. Banks do terrifically terrible for a worker co-op. There's a reason why very few banks are worker co-ops.
Yeah, I get what I'm saying. I'm in favor of is the like higher level, like just board positions in the CEO. Those should be required to be elected position.
Why?
Well, I currently believe in the current system we have. It's the worker really doesn't get to have enough of a say in those types of things, and I believe that is a really good way to make it so they have a say. And
You
a
can
lot of my
literally
philosophy-
accomplish this by just arguing in favor of unions. You do not have to go to something so extreme. You could just argue
get-
unions.
Yeah, and I get that, but the thing is, I believe
And
that
and by just so you know, right, the difference between unions and worker co-ops is that unions have been shown to work every single time. Whereas like a worker co-op, not necessarily. It depends. It depends on what you're measuring. It depends on what exactly. It doesn't necessarily show success in a business. There's a reason why when it comes to a capitalist country, that while worker co-op, there's nothing stopping somebody from making worker co-ops, that there's a stunning minority of worker co-ops.
I mean, I feel like that might just be because people don't want to, people don't want to have the influence of the worker. People don't, a lot of...
It's not that people don't want to have the influence. It's that we operate under a basis of argument of private property, right? And societies, from as far as we can tell, by establishing a right to private property, this makes society better. And so the framework of how that ends up coming out to is that there's individuals that possess their own private property and that we defend that. Right. And so this idea of like a worker co-op and a potential expropriation of the private ownership of the means of production to go to the working class it's idealistic as far as I'm concerned.
I get that, but I feel like that every single argument, not every single argument, obviously, but a lot of arguments people make against like worker co-ops, or workplace democracy more specifically, I feel like those are the same types of arguments people used to make against governments.
Monarchs.
Yeah, monarchs.
Yeah,
would say,
except we can observe when we make the change that it got better. That didn't happen under worker co-ops, but it did happen under the unions. That we can observe.
What exactly examples are you going to bring up for this?
What? We had worker unions throughout the United States, and then we created this nightmare policy called right to work state, aka right for a corporation to screw every single worker that works under their belt and be damned every single one of those workers. And then we're going to call it right to work. Why not just get rid of right to work? Like you could literally have all the things that you want to happen by just having by just arguing getting rid of right to work.
I mean, I was not talking. I'm still a supporter of unions. Do not get me wrong. I'm not like anti-union in any way possible. I was more asking for what your examples were of workplace democracy failing.
Yeah, so like a bank is not necessarily super great for a worker co-op. There's also the basis that there could be an individual that wants to keep their private property and they don't want to sell it to the workers. But your argument is expropriation of that by force, if need be. I completely disagree with that. I show no empirical evidence that that results in a better society. I
think, because personally, the reason I believe in workplace democracy is I kind of see the government has a monopoly on violence. That's like something they do have. But I believe like the corporations, they have more of a monopoly over your individual economic situation. And people say just move if you don't like the corporation, yada yada, but I think that we ought to treat those two kind of powers very similarly, because often they are intertwined.
Okay, explain.
So, I mean, like, I think that corporations, they have a monopoly on your economic resources. And I think that is maybe not quite as powerful, but still on the same...
How does a corporation have a monopoly over your economic resources?
If you're working for them, I mean.
You can get up and leave and go work for someone else. You're aware of that, right?
I
You're
know,
the
but
owner of your own body, not the corporation.
I get that, but again, it is very hard to leave a corporation. It's not easy to just. It's like going to someone, in my opinion, going to someone in an autocratic regime, and saying just move. Like even if moving is possible, that doesn't change the fact that the regime is wrong, and that it's
This wouldn't be
unjust.
different under a worker co-op model.
I said workplace democracy.
Yeah, so that's a worker co-op. A workplace democracy would be a worker co-op. That doesn't do anything to remove that problem. People will still be in jobs that they don't want to work at.
But if we allow them to actually elect the CEOs and maybe like some of the shareholders, then that means that they get to still have a say, even if it's hard.
Really? So your problem is that they don't get a say, right?
Yes.
What do you think? I'm going to just tell you. What do you think a union does?
I get that point, but
So
it's
what's
hard
your position other than you just really you have this idealistic idea of how the world should work with little empirical evidence that it actually works? Why not argue for the thing that we know works?
And I am all in favor of unions still. Do not get me wrong. I am all in favor of unions. I can argue for unions all day. I think that personally, this is a better system because if a union wants to change the ways of a corporation, it's way harder than being able to re-elect people.
Repeat that.
If a union wants to like change the way a corporation is doing, they have to either go on strike, or they have to, if they really
Well,
need
yeah,
to
that's how they do it. Yeah, it works.
that's still
It's an effective
damaging.
strategy at getting things done and making sure that the worker doesn't get screwed by the corporation. But but just so you know, right? In order to achieve what you're asking for the literal expropriation of people's property, which we have zero indication that results in a higher quality of living standard.
I get that. And again, I'm saying this is something I believe unions would be a good way to at least begin to get workplace democracy. Again, I said this was not something that we wanted to have immediately. I'm not arguing for us to just immediately start expelling these people. I think this is something that would need to happen down the line, and of course with like a social change of the way we view work. But I believe it is a worthwhile goal to work towards eventually.
Why?
Because again, in unions, if the worker wants to try to, get some change out of their boss, if they want to try and do that, then that means they have to go on strike, which does work, but that also means they're giving up, like, that is something that is hard to do. It makes it, it's hard to go on strike, and it means you won't be getting much money, and that is hard. So I believe that with eventually down the line, having the worker be able to elect their boss would mean that they get to more easily influence the policy without having to, go on strike, which is hard for them.
You understand that there's more to a union than going on strike, right?
Of course I do. And I mean,
You're asking for more workplace democracy. Unions give you the leverage to do so. The next thing that it does is that it allows you to get paid better and have more benefits and be actually paid the equitable amount of your job, and it ensures that things remain equal between workers, specifically in how they negotiate salaries. So all of the things that you're concerned about with capitalism gets resolved with just arguing against right-to-work states. You don't have to offer this quixotic idea of what's going to be the best when there's something that we can empirically show that works. And that's kind of what's frustrating to me, because it always goes to the most extreme thing as opposed to the thing we know works.
And I'm not arguing against unions. I am a big union supporter. I believe, and unionizing could be a worthwhile way to actually get this social change I'm talking about. I am not against unions. I'm not arguing against unions. I believe unions are very good. I am saying that later down the line, that workplace democracy should be the way we go.
Why?
I
I have no empirical evidence that expropriating the means of production results in a better society.
I get that, but I think we already have good examples of, workplace democracies, and they already work. I think that it is a
Some
better
do.
system for the workers.
Some do, but not all do. But your argument was requiring. I'm not against worker co-ops. You understand that? Like, I'm saying I'm against this mandate. And I think I know where the idea of a mandate comes from. You like socialism. You like the idea of socialism. It's romantic. But there's little empirical evidence outside of just some philosophical framework.
I get that. And I believe it's also worthwhile to collect evidence on these things. I don't think much evidence really has been collected about the success of worker co-ops and such, and like mandating it because it's never been done before. But I think later down the line, after unions have become more commonplace than they have, hopefully, then that means we can start working towards that goal. And I believe like one of the big problems with communism was people tried to do it way too quickly. Was they were just like immediately, we're gonna do this very fast, and we're not gonna try and slowly work towards it. Instead, we're gonna try to, we're just gonna immediately have a revolution, and everything is gonna be changed immediately. I don't believe change can come quickly and be that good.
But you're looking at the idea that a union is just an incremental step to the ultimate desire of making the workers own the means of production. And I disagree with that.
I mean, if you can disagree with that.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, actually, you go ahead. I know.
Let me give you and I've given this example before. Are you aware of what the material dialectic is?
Not exactly.
Okay. So if you read Marx, right, they refer to what is called the material dialectic. The material dialectic is basically just arguing similar to that of Hegelian dialectic, where basically what it is that you have a thesis, which is an initial idea of the world or of something, some historical implication. And then you'll find, as a result of the thesis, an antithesis form in protest to the original thesis. And then after the antithesis comes forward, then you have the synthesis, which is the idea of both kind of put together. I personally believe we've already, in terms of the material dialectic, they're referring to this same concept, but in a material sense. They're arguing that the new thesis, or rather, the antithesis to the original thesis of unbridled capitalism of the late 1800s to the 1910s to the 1920s, they needed to respond to that by having the workers' ownership of the means of production. Well, they got it. They got their antithesis, right? The 20th century happened, but it failed. It didn't work. And so now what we have is the synthesis, which is going to be capitalism mixed with social safety nets. So I think it's quite probable that the next thesis will not be socialism, but it would actually just rather be it would rather just simply be more likely like a technocratic oligarchy where you have a bunch of AI that does all of the work for humans and humans just don't have to work. That would be like an example of something that is likely to happen in the next 100 to 200 years.
Mm-hmm. So you do mention a lot about how I'm for the expropriation of all corporations that are in workplace democracy, but I believe what we should do is we should slowly be introducing more worker co-ops, more unions, to where at that point we get eventually to a point where most corporations are already workplace democracies. We already get it to that point. That way, even if we get to that law, it doesn't actually expropriate many corporations.
I mean, if people are doing things voluntarily, I don't see any problem with that.
Yeah, and I believe eventually we can get to that point if we work towards it. And if eventually more and more people get to that, and then
I'll argue
lobby-
against the right to work state, though. Because that one I know would actually result in a better society for pretty much everybody. Because right now it's obvious to me that the trickle-down economics from Reagan is not successful, and it is also a prevailing strategy among many economists throughout the world, which is really upsetting. Thankfully, I don't think that most economists argue in favor of that kind of thing. But I mean, the austerity politics isn't necessarily not there, and we can already observe that the worker is more productive than ever before, but they're making less money than ever.
Yeah, and I agree that we should be focusing right now on the short-term action. This is more of like what we should be working towards in the long term, which is not exactly what we're doing right now, which is where we're just trying to get out of this mess we have. But yeah, I believe in the long term, working towards it to where we can have a society where that's possible is a worthwhile goal, and to have a society where workplace democracy can be mandated without having to expropriate a bunch of different corporations to where it's already commonplace enough to where it doesn't matter.
Cool. Well, I think we reached to some level of an agreement. So do you have anything else for me?
I think that's it. Thank you.
All right. I really appreciate it, buddy. Thank you. You should see your video sometime soon, Kapacraft. I'll message you on when it'll come on my chat. Thank you.
Yep. Bye.